100 years we see our life on earth through your eyes.
Has he been an influence? What's your feelings on Sir David, just sort of more generally?
Well, generally, and I know he hates being called a national treasure, but he is that and more. I mean, his role in BBC Two, which is a man of 80, I remember it happening and being so proud of it happening, and the way he embraced so many facets of British life, the arts, media, money. All kinds of things which were being left aside in modern broadcasting. He was very brave, audacious.
I think he's inspired and influenced everybody, actually. He's so much part of the fabric of growing up in England in the last 50 years that I couldn't even tease out which parts came from him and which parts didn't. So, yes, I think he's been the critical figure, really.
When he suddenly left the BBC, he was still making programmes. I remember he left the BBC. He'd left behind stuff like 40 Towers and terrific stuff like that. But he started to dive right into climate issues and into nature. And of course, I watched those films and those film series and was incredibly affected by them. And he managed to kind of introduce me into the whole conversation about climate change and the loss of nature and the loss of species in nature without any kind of preachiness. There is this sense that when we talk about this, that we feel a great sense of shame, particularly in my generation, what we call the boomers. I'm pre-boomer, actually, but the boomer generation and the pre-boomer generation. People born at the end of the war were brought up in this world where there was a huge sense of relief that the world just hadn't been blown to pieces. And we were lucky and things must be better. But nature was not high on the list. It was assumed that nature would look after itself, and there was this clear assumption that if the world had been blown to bits, that nature would have taken over, and it would have survived and looked after itself.
Can you remember a pivotal moment of wonder at the natural world?
I can remember being in Menorca on a little sort of retreat thing that I did, and becoming more and more alert to how beautiful the sunsets were and taking thousands of photographs, and then realizing, of course, that everything was changing all the time anyway. I'd probably never look at the photographs again, and I should just sit down and enjoy the experience, which in fact became one of the main things about my own work, that I was making things that were changing all the time, and I should stop bothering about trying to get still images of them and just enjoy the process and say goodbye to it when it finished, sort of thing.
Just to ask your relationship with nature, can you remember a pivotal moment of wonder or something that influenced or inspired you from the natural world?
Oh, there must be a lot. I think probably more to do with the sea than the land. I lived in West London as a kid and hung out in the parks and stuff, and there wasn't very much nature going on. But my father was a musician and used to work on the Isle of Man in the summer, and that's where we had our holidays, and I love the sea. And the Isle of Man's interesting because it has this really strange microclimate where it's only 7 miles across, but on one side it can be sunny, on the other side it can be raining. And so it was my first introduction into the way that climate is affected by land. But also the sea in the Irish Sea, it can be incredibly rough. And so I got used to being seasick on the ferries going backwards and forwards. The sea was, and it's where I learned to swim. And yeah, so for me it's the sea, and it still is the sea in a spiritual sense as well. interest in Sufi poetry with Rumi and Hafiz leads me to, oceanic memes, and I use them a lot in my lyric writing.
But there's still